I won't. I'll call to order the Bourne Board of Health meeting. Okay. There is a Zoom chat with this. It will not be monitored. Participants who wish to speak must raise the hand icon until the chair asks them to unmute. Note, and I would ask the people on Zoom not to unmute until they're asked to. Note, this meeting is being televised and recorded by Bourne Community TV for replay. If anyone in the audience is also recording or videotaping, they need to acknowledge such at this time. You may do that, but you have to tell us that you're doing it. All items within the meeting agenda are subject to deliberation and votes by the Board of Health. And we have an audience, actually. Welcome. Always glad to see members of the public. Well, our crowds have been bigger in the past. We've had standing room only, I'm told, but that's something else. Okay. If anyone in the public wishes to access the meeting remotely, they can do so by clicking on the Zoom link or by calling the following conference line, which you should have on the minutes. Okay, the first item is attendance. I see Dusty, Dawn, myself. I see Barbara Princiotta. And has anybody heard from Bobby?
I have not, no.
Okay, no. We have a quorum. Okay, the first thing we wanted to get was an update on the Mass DEP watershed permit regulation presentation. And then the second item was going to be the drinking water program. But who's here to present on things that we should, let's say, not only know something more about, but just get some, some sort of a feel as to what we should be preparing to implement. Is that it? Which one of you is going to do that?
All three of us.
Yeah.
Oh, great, okay. And there he is now, okay. So amend the attendance to include Mr. Collette. All right, in order to do this, where should they sit or stand?
I think they're going to head up towards the podium with the microphone.
Okay.
And I will share my screen
Okay.
so that the presentation can be up on behind us here.
So ladies first, but will you all introduce yourselves to the audience?
Yes, I'm Samantha Turgeon. I am an environmental analyst at Mass DP in the Southeast Regional Office
Okay, and that's in Lakeville, right?
in Lakeville.
Okay, and,
I'm Maggie Leary. I'm also an
I'm
environment.
sorry, what's your first name?
My name's Maggie Leary.
Maddie Leary?
Maggie.
Okay.
With a G, Maggie.
Maggie,
Yes.
Oh.
Margaret, short for Margaret.
okay.
Um,
And
I'm
Go
an
ahead.
environmental analyst with DEP for the Southeast Regional Office, and I work for the Wastewater Cape and Islands team.
Okay, and our tall friend here.
Drew Osei. I'm also an engineer for the Mass DEP. Same office as these two as well, Lakeville, Southeast Region. I'm the lead for the watershed permitting group, as well as for groundwater discharge facilities and providing guidance to Board of Health as well. So.
Well, thank you all for coming. This is very important to us. And we did send you some questions up, but what I'd like you to do is go through your presentation and then respond to some of the questions that we've sent on. And who's the lead?
Okay, I'm going to be presenting first.
Okay.
So again, my name is Samantha Turgeon. Okay, so I'm going to try to read this because it's
Yeah, it's small.
just a background on the issue. Many of the estuaries in Massachusetts do not meet Massachusetts water quality standards, resulting in an impaired listing and requiring the development of total maximum daily loads. 31 TMDLs have been issued across Cape watersheds. And as everybody knows, this is an environmental problem, and it's also an economic problem.
And for our audience, how does it become an economic problem?
Sure. So in terms of the economy aspect to it, I mean, Cape Cod, it's part of the Commonwealth, right? And so it attracts.
We always thought so.
So it attracts people seasonally for tourism. And so the health of the embayments and vitality of the ponds, the environment in general, that's what attracts people. And so we want to continue to attract people to the area because that's important for the economy. And so that's how it's an economic problem as well as an environmental problem. The two are, always connected.
It certainly is, and I hope the audience that's listening to this hears that, because the economic value of the Cape is based upon the pristine nature of our water supply.
Okay, next slide. Okay, so for the town of Bourne, there are 2 EPA-approved nitrogen TMDLs. So because there are those nitrogen TMDLs that were approved by the EPA, and also there was a 208 plan, developed in 2015. They are designated as natural resource areas, nitrogen-sensitive areas, upon the promulgation of the regulations on July 7th, 2023. So those are the 2 watersheds in Bourne that...
And they are,
Megantic-Squitigue and Phineas Harbor.
and what about Buttermilk Bay? Is we share that watershed with Wareham. How does that overlap work?
So it is not designated as a natural resource area, nitrogen-sensitive area. So it's not subject to the regulations that we'll talk about today.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So this whole table is about the Title V requirements for natural resource area, nitrogen-sensitive areas. There are 4 different pathways that a municipality could go through. At the top, you can see the titles, Title V requirements. Those are in the absence of a notice of intent, a watershed permit application, watershed permit, or a de minimis nitrogen load exemption application or an exemption. The second column is the notice of intent if that gets filed, so on and so forth. So we'll start with the first column. So if the municipality just decides to follow the Title V requirements, there are the implications of that below. For new construction, 12 months after the effective date of the promulgation of the regulations, 12 months after that, best available nitrogen reducing technology, also known as BANART, is required to be implemented. For existing systems, the same technology, best available nitrogen reducing technology, would have to be implemented within 5 years, but that starts 2 years after the notice of intent and application period ends, so it's within 7 years. And then the other stipulation is Compliance with Title V NRA NSA requirements alone may not be sufficient to promote habitat restoration, and so the municipality can still risk litigation from third parties without putting in any additional efforts.
Well, saying that, our major concern is to make the waters that are here in the watershed reduce the contribution to, let's say, to either particulate matter or pollution. What are some of the things that people can do while we're in this interim period, in your opinion?
Could you elaborate on that, some
Well,
things that people can do?
Some of the concern that people have is they're facing, because we don't have exact information and we're in that interim period, a lot of people are concerned about, well, what can they do in the interval before mandatory implementation and now, so let's say, to contribute to the reduction of the pollution that, that we're trying to eliminate or reduce.
So it's not necessarily something that one person can accomplish. This is a community problem, and so community solutions are required. And so, I mean, things that people can do, even though it's not required, assuming that there's a pursuit towards NOI, to put in an IA system, that could reduce nitrogen. However, as Sam said, that might necessarily get you to where we need to be for habitat restoration, because they may not reduce enough. And so community solutions are required to intercept the nitrogen to a level that could promote habitat restoration and restore the eelgrass and have a better, embayment beach areas, and also protect your ponds, because the Title V systems don't necessarily reduce the phosphorus that can impact your ponds.
Okay.
So it's not a one-person thing,
All right, so,
unfortunately. Yeah.
This is a situation where the community has to operate together in order to solve it. And the steps that have to be taken have to be, I guess, agreed to by everybody moving forward. And I think that that's one of the things that I know that our government, folks, the select board, is concerned with, is making the right moves at this particular stage. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so one of the pathways that the municipality can move forward is to submit a notice of intent. So if the notice of intent is filed, those NRA NSA requirements under Title V would be suspended within the watershed area that is covered by the notice of intent. Once the notice of intent is approved, the town works towards the milestones and the submittal of a watershed permit. And the other stipulation is that the area is still subject to local bylaws or town-specific plans that are at least as stringent as the applicable Title V upgrade and new construction regulations. Okay, so moving to submitting a watershed permit application to eventually get a watershed permit. Again, the NRA NSA requirements under Title V would be suspended for that the area covered by the watershed permit application, watershed permit. Once the permit is issued, the permittee must follow the terms and conditions of the permit. And again, the area is still subject to local bylaws, and town-specific plans are at least as stringent as the applicable Title V upgrade and new construction regulations. And the last option that we have on this table is a municipality can apply for a de minimis nitrogen load exemption. That's if the watershed contributes less than 3% of a nitrogen load to the embayment. And in that case, the requirements under Title V would be suspended while Mass DEP is reviewing the exemption application. And if that nitrogen, de minimis nitrogen load exemption is approved, upgrade requirements are no longer required under Title V in that area. And then if it is denied, then the notice of intent and application period, which is that 2-year period, will resume from the date of submission of the de minimis nitrogen load exemption application. And still, again, the disclaimer, the area will still be subject to local bylaws, town-specific plans, et cetera, as been stated, as has been stated in the previous 2 columns. So with that, I'll hand it over to Maggie. She's going to present next.
Okay, so we're just going to discuss the notice of intent in a little more detail. So the notice of intent essentially is a proposed schedule. So it's going to ensure that the watershed permit application is filed. And the watershed permit should be issued as soon as possible, but no later than 7 years from the NSA designation. So for Bourne specifically, that 2-year period started July 7th of 2023 to file the NOI.
What about the extension to July of 2024?
Yeah, so the 2024 speaks to new construction.
Okay,
But you still have the 2 years plus the 5 if you were to opt to go the NSA route for the upgrades. But
Okay.
to submit the NOI, you technically have the NOI period, the whole NOI period. So,
thank you.
And within the NOI, there has to be specific milestones that are laid out. So some examples of these milestones could be updating your comprehensive wastewater management plan, sending the draft into DEP for approval, MEPA certification approval. It could be, another milestone could be an intermunicipal agreement between 2 towns sharing a watershed. It could be passing local bylaws, like a fertilizer bylaw or a stormwater bylaw. It could also be engineering design completion or other Mass DEP permitting approvals. So say you got a groundwater discharge permit approval. That would be another good example of a milestone. And then strategy-specific developments. So with a notice of intent, the specific file that the application is a WP94, and that's going to be filed through Mass DEP through EEA Place.
Thank you.
Of course. The next. Okay, perfect. So the watershed management plan. So that it can also be a CWMP or a TWMP, but for this I'm referring to it as a watershed management plan. So with this, towns can utilize previously approved comprehensive or targeted watershed management plans. So you don't have to start from scratch if you already have a CWMP that needs to be updated or just needs to be improved. So Mass DEP provides technical assistance meetings to help guide the development of the watershed management plan. So specifically myself and Drew, we would be the contacts for that. So we would provide these assistance meetings to help you develop your CWMP, with all the components that are needed.
Okay, and in looking at that, do you also coordinate with the the Cape Cod Commission?
Yes. Yep. So because of the 208 plan.
Okay,
Yep. So the watershed management plan, or CWMP, it has to be signed and stamped by a Massachusetts registered professional engineer. So that's something to keep in mind. And as we go through the watershed management plan process, as it's developed and implemented, there may be some project changes or parameter changes or things that change as time goes on. And when that happens, a notice of project change may need to be filed with MEPA for MEPA approval.
for the audience, what does MEPA stand for?
MEPA is the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act, and basically the MEPA certificate approval is saying that our impact on these water bodies is not more than it needs to be. So it's basically looking at to make sure there's no negative impacts towards the environment. Okay, so with the watershed permit, there are specific contents needed in the application. So, of course, the application itself is provided by Mass DEP, so that form needs to be a part of it. And as I said, the watershed management plan that is a part of the watershed permit, applying to the watershed permit, it needs to be signed and stamped by a professional engineer. If there is an agreement between 2 towns, it should be, a legally liable agreement where the 2 towns are agreeing that they're each going to be responsible for their percentage of pollutant taken out of the water.
No, that brings up a point in my mind where we are a border town on Cape Cod. We
Right.
border on both Wareham and Plymouth
Mm-hmm.
with regard to, the intermunicipal agreements that we've seen so far are usually between or among the 15 towns here in the Cape. how do we implement a strategy to get that, let's say, agreement with towns in Plymouth County?
That's a great question. Do you know how to address that?
Mass DEP can serve as a facilitator within those meetings, but it really comes down to the implementation strategy that's being considered. And so if there's a strategy that could benefit both parties where there's reduction of the nitrogen from the watershed, but at the same time, it doesn't impede meeting a NIPD's permit on the other side, then that's a IMA that can work. So it really depends on the strategy and what exactly is the goal of both parties. But it would work the same way as it works with the Cape Towns.
Okay, thank you.
And then, so there's elements that are a part of the permit, specific elements, and that would be an implementation schedule, proposed necessary nitrogen load reductions, and with that, there's a specific guidance document. So MEP, the Massachusetts Estuaries Program, they have a document specifically for Megansett-Squetig and specifically for Phineas Harbor. And in that document, it details exactly how much nitrogen needs to be taken out of these embayments.
Does that document already exist?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yep, and a lot of towns rely on these documents for guidance because of that. It can be helpful to see what percentage each town maybe needs to take out. And it can give you different ideas for strategies of how to remove nitrogen. So it's a really great document to rely on for this.
Okay, thank you.
And then a few more elements, water quality and implementation strategy, monitoring and reporting, adaptive management framework, identification of other permits, and then permit-specific and general conditions. I'm going to hand off the next slide to Drew, and he's going to get into a little more detail about these elements and these components.
Yeah, so in terms of the contents of the application of a watershed permit, I'm just going to hit some of the high points. In order to really get the detailed requirements for the watershed permit, you would have to go directly to the regs. But as mentioned earlier, we are here to help, and we expect to continue to meet with the towns, Bourne included, with developing their watershed management plan and assuring that the right elements are within it. Because since they're in the process of putting that together right now, just have that a one-time ordeal and not make it an iterative process where we can assure that the items that are input into the watershed management plan simultaneously will be worked for the watershed permit application, so it's not done twice. So just hitting some of the high notes here, historic water quality conditions, having those monitoring results included in the application. I believe there is a relationship with the Buzzards Bay and that the coalition, they do a lot of sampling, and so leveraging that relationship and using data that is already being taken, that can be included in the application. Previous and ongoing efforts, if there are already efforts to reduce nitrogen within the watershed, that can be considered as credit. And so including that into your watershed permit application allows us to not only see what has been done in the past, but seeing if that can be continued into the future, and we can account for that moving forward. Updated land use and the 20-year projected growth, that calculates or feeds into your necessary nitrogen load reduction. And so a big theme with the watershed permitting regulations is flexibility. We allow the towns to propose their plans and exactly what they will be reducing. And so as Maggie stated, the baseline is what's established in the MEP and adopted into the TMDL report. But in terms of your 20-year projected growth, looking at, these are 20-year permits, and so what occurs in the watershed during that time, that calculation is done by the town to see what is actually realistic. What type of growth would we like to see, or what would happen? And then accounting for that, planning for that ahead of time. And the updated land use, that's taking the MEP and bringing it to today's date. So I'm not saying creating a whole new model and going through that whole project, which was very extensive, but more so just looking at the changes in the watershed, so development that's taken place, if there's any strategies that have been already put in. You can look at the IA systems as well, or stormwater, best management practices, the things that have been taking place in the watershed since the MEP that may have changed how we're looking at nitrogen, so you have a better look at the goal for the 20 years. And so that's your updated land use, the 20-year projected growth, as that goes into your necessary nitrogen load reduction goal. Then the strategies and what is expected of those strategies. And so there's a list of strategies from the 208 plan, and so you can use those to see what's appropriate for the watershed, and that could be reduced, and that would be established in your CWMP or TWMP. Moving to the next bullet, the implementation plan. And so, yes, these are 20-year permits, and at the end of it, at a minimum, we're hoping to see at least a reduction of 75% of the proposed nitrogen. So that's not 100%, so there's flexibility in there. And then also,
When you're using a figure of 75%,
Yep.
that's a global figure. So,
75% of what?
75% of what?
Yeah, so 75% of the town's contribution to the watershed.
Okay.
And again, the town can propose what they want to plan for. So it's using the MEP as the baseline and then catching us up to today's date. But then in terms of your growth, that's all up to the town to determine. And so once you put all that together, it's 75% of that number. But again, there's flexibility because a lot of towns are in different positions and have different goals and different initiatives. And so if there's a lot going on in a different front, we can consider that because as I'll get into in the next slide, you can incorporate other contaminants or things to focus on in your watershed permit. And so if there's a need for phosphorus removal and really focusing on that in your freshwater ponds, that could be considered, as long as we can still meet 75% of the goal that you're establishing or proposing to DEP.
On the buildup of phosphorus as opposed to nitrogen, because nitrogen is in the air, okay, and on phosphorus, is that primarily introduced through fertilizer?
Oh, phosphorus sources, I mean, it can come through the septics, for untreated wastewater. Fertilizers, it really depends on, I mean, there's a wide array of fertilizers. So it really depends on the type of fertilizer. But for the most part, we're seeing just the untreated wastewater being the impact. Because it's not necessarily nitrogen that's, causing the algal blooms, but the phosphorus for the freshwater bodies.
Well, as I understand it, phosphorus is what I'd call more stagnant than nitrogen. Nitrogen, I think, tends to move
Yep.
and to get absorbed. So that a strategy of, let's say, of grass, for example, can reduce the amount of nitrogen that's retained in the soil.
Yep, attenuation.
Yeah, and then if it's in a situation where you're combining it with stormwater that is washing the soil or through the soil, into a water body, the phosphorus tends to stick and the nitrogen tends to be diluted.
Yeah.
Was that?
Well, I wouldn't say diluted, but it can be attenuated. But
right, okay.
the travel time between the two constituents are much different. And so that's why if a town, in summary, just had other things to focus on, that's something we would consider as the watershed permit is being brought together. Next bullet is conventional strategies. So there's plenty of alternative strategies, such as IA systems and provisional use approval, permeable reactive barriers, aquaculture, as well as assumptions for removal from fertilizer reduction or even best management practices from stormwater. But these are all speculative in what they can remove.
I think that, as I recall, we've had a process or a practice of using aquaculture to also clean up areas that, that we found to be inundated with, say, nitrogen overloads and things like that. Some of the planting of quahog beds and oysters have sometimes been put in those areas. Overall, I don't know if there's another area that would be as constant, or would have as much aquaculture as we do, but in the other areas like New Bedford and places like that, are you seeing the use of shellfish planting as a method of clearing up waterways?
So about, I would say, 5 to 10 years ago, it was kind of the thing that everyone wanted to pilot and try out.
Yeah.
But it's just very uncertain, and with what's at stake, it's hard to rely on the oysters. And as we're seeing climate change as well, and potential impacts when it comes to disease and dying off for the aquaculture, it is better, well, I can't say it's better seen, but how communities are now utilizing it is more as a supplementing other strategies rather than the sole strategy itself.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then conventional strategies such as package treatment plants, sewering, cluster systems, and general use approved IA systems. So just making sure that your alternatives are backed up with a conventional strategy.
Can I ask one question?
Sure, go ahead.
What are your concerns with PFAS?
A lot.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm asking.
And so I mentioned earlier, if towns are focusing on other contaminants or constituents as well, as watershed permits are brought together, that's something that's considered. And so with PFAS, as towns are doing the watershed management planning process, that's something that should be considered. And not just PFAS, other contaminants of emerging concern. Because whatever strategy you choose, you want that to be sustainable and have that be able to, as they say, be able to adapt within an adaptive management framework and be able to approach multiple constituents if possible. And so that's why centralized treatment sometimes is more advantageous, which leads right into the next bullet of core sewer area. If there's an area that is contaminated with PFAS, collaborating on the drinking water side and seeing if that's better to treat there, sometimes it may be advantageous of having a core sewer area so you can have a centralized treatment of the PFAS. But it depends what's more cost effective, and that's a case-by-case scenario.
Because all the development so far that I've seen now to correct PFAS, reduce it, whatever you can do, is we're doing very well at our landfill. And they've brought in a company out of Australia. And the numbers we're getting up there are way beyond what anyone else in Massachusetts. We're way low. And it bothers me because I learned that PFAS can be migrated to many areas by many means, shellfish, fowl, everything of that nature, even the human being touching and moving it. And so to me, that's a very big dangerous thing because it's a silent killer. Let me put it that way. You can't see it. And that's why I figured the state would delve more into it in trying to find a development somehow to cut back on PFAS.
Well, I can tell you the Boston office is working on it. The tough thing is being able to detect it consistently and with approved EPA standard method protocols. And so that is kind of what hanged things up a bit on the EPA level for a while. But they're still working on trying to find the best way to address it on the wastewater side. But they do assure us that it is something that needs to be done and it's being worked on.
To me, it's in its infancy of being just really noticed. Nitrogen's been on the table for a long time.
Yeah.
But this has not. It's something, in my estimation, fairly new. So, good luck.
All right, and the last two bullets, necessary maps. So just delineating the area that will be covered by the watershed permit, as well as agreement of locations for sampling using the Sentinel stations that were established in the MEP report, and then any other locations that may be seen as pertinent by the town. And then having quality assurance project plans to validate the data that is being formed from those efforts, as well as the performance data from the strategies. Next slide, please. So I've mentioned throughout this flexibility. I'll also start, before I get to the bullets, when it comes to flexibility, the time frame. That changed quite a bit during the promulgation period. And the time frame to not only apply for NOI, but then reduce the nitrogen and not have compliance be seen towards the attainment in the abatement, but more so just the effort and the removal of nitrogen through the strategies. That's a big room for flexibility that is offered through the regulations. And so the other areas would be allowing towns to take advantage of their existing efforts for CWMP, TWMP planning in making their watershed management plan. And so not reinventing the wheel and having to start over. A lot of concern was expressed from the communities that that was just a waste of money, and there was already a long time period of planning or kind of redoing efforts. And so there's a good amount of planning either taking place or have already been done, and that should be taken advantage of. So we heard that message and incorporate that into the regs, allowing communities to have the choice between choosing one permit to cover all of the watersheds that they would like versus separate permits for each watershed, allowing towns to decide that on their own. We've talked about it already in terms of considering other pollutants within the watershed permit, and so that was a room for flexibility. And then also acknowledging that some areas of a watershed in a town, it is very negligible, less than 3%, which we call de minimis load. And so creating a de minimis load exemption where that town can acknowledge that they'll control their load that's 3% or less and not have to go through the permit process. And so with Bourne right now, with the focus being on Phineas and Megansett-Squetique, that wouldn't be applicable, but there might be remnants of nitrogen that goes to another watershed in Falmouth, and for those we would say you don't have to do a whole watershed permit for that. It would just be exempt because most likely it's less than 0.5%. So next slide, please. And so we just wanted to cover a couple of funding opportunities. So SNAP, Southeast New England program, their Restore America's Estuaries grant program, that is currently out now for requests for proposals. And so that is an opportunity for funding, and that's a grant. It's not a loan like our state revolving fund, which we still do advocate that towns can take advantage of. And that money...
Towns take advantage of, is this also available for individuals?
The state revolving fund,
Yeah,
the SRF, through the towns.
through the town?
Through the towns.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's a septic loan management program.
Yeah,
So
yeah. We have one here and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But I think the emphasis that, I'm trying to communicate to the folks out there is that they're all facing a lot of individual anxiety about what's going on. And the town itself is looking for a direction which they've yet to commit to. So all of this information that you're giving us is very useful and important.
oh, thanks. And then I'll just cover the last two grant opportunities from Mass DEP. The 319 non-point source grants and 604B water quality management planning grants, which can be used for planning and implementation. And we're expecting more grants to come as well, just because there's an obvious need and it's apparent throughout our groups.
So those grants are available through the town, not to a direct grant to an individual. They are monitored and managed and accepted, and the responsibility is with the town.
Exactly. Next slide. And so wrapping up, with our group being, brought together and just kind of the disconnect that occurred after the pandemic, we just wanted to make sure that people have our contact information. And so we have 3 of us here today, but also within our group, Aaron Raposo and Ian Jarvis, as well as Sean Carney. Aaron and Ian, you can contact them for Title V interpretation as well as groundwater discharge program questions. Sean Carney for anything hydrogeologically related, and he may even be out there for soil evaluator testing. So he knows all about deeps and perks and can provide you deep hole testing and percolation hole testing. He can provide you guidance on that. And then Maggie and I specialize in the watershed permitting program and watershed management planning area. And so we can answer questions on that.
Folks?
Yeah, just one. Do you people allow up in Lakeville for private people, citizens, whatever, coming up with water to have tested? Do you people do that? To see what's in it?
No, we don't directly test.
The county does that.
County lab has that.
The county does?
The county does that.
Yeah,
We've
because
been
I
doing it
want
for
to have
years.
my irrigation one tested.
Well, if you go to the county, they'd be able to either do it or
Right.
arrange to have it done.
We have collection kits at the office as well that we can give you.
So if I give you a jar of water, you're gonna test?
I'm not gonna do it, but I'll
Oh,
give you the jar.
jeez, here we go. Thank you. It was very informative.
It was. I have a couple questions.
Yep.
What criteria are considered when designating any specific area as nitrogen sensitive as it pertains to the regulations?
Yeah, and so are you focused on the current designations or potential future ones?
Current.
Current. So the formula for that was an area subject to the 208 plan, which was issued by Cape Cod Commission and approved by the EPA in 2015. And then a scientific evaluation, such as an MEP report, that was adopted to a TMDL. And so since we have the EPA-approved TMDLs that demonstrated the level of impairment, plus that 208 plan, that led to the designation.
Okay. Do you know where we stand numerically or in contrast to other local towns that have similar?
So, well, right now you have Phineas and Magansett, so 2.
Right.
Falmouth has the most, 14 to 16. But Orleans, they have Pleasant Bay, and then they are deciding to plan for Nauset, even though Nauset doesn't currently have a TMDL. And so they're aware through local monitoring that it needs to be addressed, and so they kind of want to get ahead of it before a TMDL is issued. Barnstable, they have several. Mashpee does as well. I mean, most towns have more than one, I would say, with the exception of Wellfleet Harbor that just has Wellfleet.
So how far up the scale, if you will, are we? How close are we to being where the desired levels are?
Oh, in terms of habitat restoration?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, yeah, so that's a hefty question. So that's hard to determine without knowledge of the monitoring data. And so, as I mentioned earlier, kind of bringing up to speed changes in the watershed from MEP, so that's early 2000s to now, and then understanding what strategies have been done, that can give you a good idea of what may happen in the future. But travel time on the Cape is, a foot per second squared, so we're on 7 to 10 years of seeing change because of groundwater travel time. So the things that are done today aren't necessarily seen for a while, but at the same time, you're intercepting nitrogen that was discharged 10 years
Yeah.
ago. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Right, and then one rhetorical question. Why would a town apply for separate permits for different areas? So if we have the two, what would be the advantage or the reason for any town applying for separate permits for each area?
So, in order to keep things organized, if you have a shared watershed, you may would like to do a or a joint permittee with another community. So, Megantic-Squatigue is shared with Falmouth,
Right.
and so that might be a reason to do a separate watershed permit. But also planning horizons. And so, as I mentioned, flexibility is offered for the NOI period for 2 years. But then that is establishing a schedule that even goes farther, right?
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily have to do a watershed permit for both Phineas and Megantic-Squatigue on the same day. You might want to do one first and then plan to do another one later. And so that gives you the flexibility of doing 2 separate permits.
Yeah, thanks. We're very informative. Appreciate it.
Don, do you have anything? Barbara?
No, I don't have anything, thank you.
Okay, now we go to Act Two, right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Our contact
Act
information
two.
is here, and we hope to continue with more meetings and facilitation in the future.
We're looking forward to working with you. So Act Two is the drinking water program. Are you folks on that too?
No, Joe is online.
Oh, she's online.
We do work with Joe.
Well, I'm glad you all work together. That warm, fuzzy feeling of all being concerned with citizens' problems. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it, very knowledgeable, and I love the fact that the state has got people that actually know what they're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you all, thanks
Have
for
a great
having us.
evening.
Thank you.
soon, very nice to meet you.
Well, okay, we've got Act Two, which is, let's see, Joe Soretti?
Yep,
I'm sorry, is it
Cerruti.
Chiretti?
Cerruti.
Chiretti.
Yeah, the U is a long sound.
Okay, well, no, I have to remember that in Italian, the C is pronounced a CH, right?
Yeah, actually, in Italy, it would be Cerruti.
Chiretti, yeah.
Actually, it'd be Cerruti.
Yeah.
I think
Oh.
I think there was a family feud way back when the Cerrutis with a single T, some of them added an extra T but kept the same pronunciation.
Well, since, in the issue of full disclosure, my mother's maiden name was Zappola, so there you go. All right, so you're going to talk to us about the drinking water program, and we're looking for technical information on Mass DEP's model private well regulations and private well guidelines as our board works to amend the well regulations. The concern that we had talked about here is that although a lot of effort and energy goes into the initial installation, there doesn't seem to be what I would call significant follow-up to ensure the safety of the well as, you know, as it's been operating. So we're looking for guidance to go forward to come up with a sensible regulation that will keep our folks safe, that happen to be using private wells. So what can you tell us?
Well, the model bylaws for boards of health to use for regulating private wells was designed with that in mind. There are no state statutes that require a local board of health to adopt those regulations. They're provided as a template for you to consider. And there is, so I've, over the past couple of decades, have provided several presentations before health agent audiences, and there is a wide variation throughout the Commonwealth in terms of whether the boards, the local private well regulations extend beyond, as you mentioned, the kind of the new construction period, and a lot of them, I believe, do just kind of focus on that, and they don't require any kind of follow-up testing over the years and decades. The model well regulations that we provided for you to consider do provide recommendations for additional follow-up sampling requirements. Just one thing that we kind of tried to keep in mind the weighing the pros and cons of requiring additional sampling, keeping in mind, the additional cost. And so we try to strike a balance between not having people have to test so often that it becomes more of an economic burden, but often enough that you're able to be reasonably protective of public health. You may have noticed if you've reviewed those model regulations, different contaminants are handled differently, and one of the main differences is that not all health risks are the same. For some contaminants like the bacteria, E. coli, and the nitrates and nitrites have acute health risks. The nitrates and nitrates for infants 6 months and younger. So we're obviously, suggesting more frequent an annual test for those contaminants. Other contaminants that are commonly occurring potentially, maybe not so much on the Cape, but in lots of Massachusetts, arsenic is a very common contaminant above the drinking water standard. But that standard is based on a long-term risk of, essentially it's drinking 2 liters a day for multiple decades, and that resulting in a long-term increase in developing some form of cancer. So you wouldn't necessarily be as concerned with a well that might periodically be a little bit above the standard, but overall is below the standard. And if it does climb above the standard because of an actual change that's, stays in place, it climbs up and stays at a higher level, it's not as critical to find that the very year that it happens. And the other thing is, if the contaminant is based on changes in the water chemistry, those changes generally don't happen very abruptly. Certainly, abrupt changes can happen if it's a result of a nearby man-made contaminant release. And I did receive an email with some questions that you guys had developed, but I don't want to. You guys are running the show, so if you want to run through questions, I'm fine to handle it that way. And there may be additional questions that come up since I received an email.
Okay, Dusty is is sort of our prime mover on this, so I'll let him start.
Yeah, what I'm after, or would like to see, is a certified time that the wells have to be tested. In other words, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. We need some guidance from the state to do this. I don't care if you built your house 40 years ago or tomorrow. The other thing that I feel that will help is if you have pollutants come into one well, there's your monitor to tell you we have a problem, and it may not be that well itself. It may be generated from another point, but it makes you aware of it.
Yep.
And we have Otis Air Force Base, which has had a major problems over the years. And we have to watch out for that, which the feds are testing all the time and have monitoring wells. But I would like to see a standardized set of rules about wells. Irrigation, I'm not too concerned about because it's only doing, lawns, things of that nature. But you still should have it tested because you may be, if you're doing your vegetable garden, you might be bringing contaminants into that and that. But that's all I got to say. I appreciate any outlook.
Yeah, so we do in the model bylaws, we do have a schedule for what we recommend for sampling frequency for individual contaminants. It's a very good point about an individual private well comes up with a detect of a contaminant, it is a warning sign that the surrounding properties may also be impacted. In fact, the way I should have introduced myself, but I work in Mass DEP's drinking water program in the Boston office. Our Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup, when they're doing site investigation, that's often how they proceed with their efforts is they've got a contaminated site, they test the nearby properties, and depending on where they're seeing contaminants, they kind of keep expanding that area. And obviously the local, the individual residents in your community don't necessarily have the access to that information, whereas you, the Board of Health, would be able to have that information if it's required to be submitted to you.
The key thing you just said was submitted to us, okay? If we don't get that, what that suggests is if we don't get that notice from the public, how do,
Right.
that's probably the motivation for looking at interval testing, is that we're concerned that that stuff is going on and people will be, let's say, put at risk because we're not, let's see, we haven't figured out a way of finding out what that stuff is, where that stuff is going on.
Yeah, so unless you have local so there's no state regulations that says that any private well sample has to be submitted to the state. There are some regulatory requirements if it exceeds a reportable release limit. It does by the Bureau of Waste Site Cleanup's Mass Contingency Plan regulations, it does require getting reported to Mass DEP, which I think would also generally, we would share that information with local Board of Health. As you can easily imagine, there are probably a lot of people that receive those results and choose not to report to the state. And I don't think there's anything in the Mass Contingency Plan regulations that would require the laboratory that runs those analyses to report to the state. So unless you have local regulations that require periodic sampling for certain contaminants get submitted to you, that's correct. You would not, if it's up to each individual homeowner or private well owner to sample their wells at sampling frequency that they deem fit, there's nothing that would require that they report that information to you.
Okay. Did you have other questions, Bessie?
No.
Okay, well, some of the questions that, that we had, for example, we've seen an approval of, let's say, of salinity in potable water. And that concerns me because as the well gets used, it seems that the logic to me is that the concentration of salinity would increase. You're using up the water and salt, doesn't tend to, let's say, to be dissolved, but could perhaps be accumulated.
It doesn't attenuate.
Right. It doesn't attenuate? So what does that mean? It doesn't attenuate. It means it doesn't get any less?
It doesn't degrade.
Okay. So it's always in the water.
Yeah, so
Is there a possibility of the density increasing while it's in the water?
yes, yeah, so really what it boils down to is what's the cause of that elevated salinity. So so in coastal settings, if you're close enough to the ocean or to some marine estuary, you certainly have the potential to be drawing some higher salinity concentrations because you're kind of close enough to that the transition between the freshwater and the saline ocean water, which does extend underneath the ground surface, and the nature of salt water is it's denser than freshwater. So if you're I'm sorry, with my background you won't be able to see things unless I put it in front of my face. So if your coastline is here, and the groundwater, if the ocean's over here, on the other side you've got your land surface. the salt water underneath the land surface, it kind of works as a wedge riding underneath the freshwater lens on top of it. So if you are drawing water in that environment where you're close to that transition between salt and brackish or salt and saline water, over time, you may very well see that the levels increase. Certainly, if you increase your pumping rate, you're going to see that increase. And if you have new homes installed nearby that are also creating a draw from the aquifer, you could see in multiple wells over time increase in salinity levels. The other major source of salt contamination comes from salt that is applied to road surfaces and parking lots, and whether or not that contamination increases over time, it's potentially not as much related to how much you're pumping out of the ground as the fact that you're continually loading new salt every winter season onto those road and paved surfaces, and then it becomes a matter of how fast is water moving through the groundwater versus the rate at which, on an annual basis in the winter months, you are adding new salt to it. So you don't necessarily always see an increasing trend in salinity, but it certainly can happen. I think that's about as much as I can provide on that.
Okay, well, I understand that, that the fact that you have let's say, a high or sandy soil, that the sandy soil would allow for transfer of liquid material through it, and with that liquid material, anything that was encapsulated into it would also be moving through that surface. So stormwater, which is would be, in my opinion, the main contributor to that, would be of some concern. So would that mean that it should be there should be a recommendation that there be more sewering in areas that, let's say, that along highways, in order to, let's say, to direct the stormwater, let's say, to an open area or to directly into the ocean? Should there be, in other words, what kind of recommendation does the state make?
That's a great question. It would be a complicated hydrological problem to solve, because anytime you're taking essentially freshwater stormwater and you're quickly shunting it off to the ocean, you're kind of creating a problem as you're trying to solve another problem. In that you're now dropping down the water table, because not as much of that rainfall is directly infiltrating into the ground surface. It may very well make sense especially in the winter months where you are applying the salt, but then there's a problem of how do you install a system that's so complex that you're kind of forcing the water to go straight to the ocean in certain times of the year and allowing it to infiltrate on site during other times of the year. I'm not familiar with any entities in Mass or outside of Mass that have attempted to do that sort of thing. Most of the efforts at mitigating that problem have to do with implementing better salting strategies. New Hampshire does a great job. They put together a course for those who are in the business of applying salt. So it's not we're not just concerned with Mass DOT and the local DPW. We're also concerned with all these entities that are contracted to remove snow from paved surfaces at private establishments. That's generally been the bigger efforts that have been made that I'm aware of, reducing the amount of salt, potentially, finding other materials that might be a little bit more benign that might also help to keep the road surfaces safe for transportation. One of the aspects of our society is that people want to be able to drive all the time, and immediately after a storm event is one of those times. So another option is to significantly reduce salting on road surfaces if you had a population that was okay with letting the snow plows remove the snow and then letting the next sunny day dry off any remaining ice on the road surface. But I don't think that cultural change is happening anytime soon.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I had lived in New Hampshire, and they brine the surfaces of the road, and if you don't have your car washed at least once every couple of weeks, the whole bottom of it rusts out. But again, that brings up the question that had been concerned about the connection between a public water supply and the evidence of that, and what effect does it have on the periphery that might have private wells in it. How do we get a report on that so that we could essentially tip off, the private well owners about that?
Information on the salinity levels at the public water systems?
Well, I don't know if there's a regular system of measuring let's say, the contaminant content, including salinity, in a public water supply, and what effect does that have on, let's say, the private well owners that are in that vicinity?
Yeah, so, part of the problem, you actually would be more interested in looking at raw water chemistry from the public water systems, because one somewhat common treatment technology, of course, is water softening, and that is essentially exchanging if it's cation exchange, like a typical water softener, it's exchanging the sodium ion for the contaminant of concern. For the smaller systems, those types of treatment systems, the water softening systems, will they usually involve an on-site periodic discharge of regeneration brine as you're regenerating your ion exchange resin. So if that is the source of the higher salinity levels at a particular public water supplier, it may not be indicative of what's happening around it. So it all depends on where's the salt coming from at any particular public water system, and in some cases it may also be from salting of nearby surfaces, but there's also the potential for some of these systems that it's a result of on-site regeneration brine discharge.
Okay.
That tends to happen more at the smaller, like the transient non-community and non-transient non-community establishments.
Okay, well, that brings up another question, which we'd put to you about how many towns, if any, in the Commonwealth, let's say, that are our size, 20 to 25,000 citizens, with about, let's say, 2,500 to 4,000 wells, have ongoing testing regulations. Are there any?
There are. Unfortunately, I can't give you a number on that. So Mass DEP there's a state statute that requires all boards of health to submit to Mass DEP copies of all Board of Health regulations, not just private law. Unfortunately, that information doesn't get digested at Mass DEP. It doesn't get, there's some very rudimentary spreadsheet that keeps track of the type of regulation, but doesn't really go into a lot of detail regarding that kind of specific detail. So, Linda Barba at Mass DEP is the person who receives all those records. We could probably only tell you what town has submitted or municipality has submitted private well regulations at a particular date, but it would not provide the details regarding whether they require water quality testing, and it definitely wouldn't get at whether they are only requiring testing for new construction or if they also require it for rental properties or property transfers or once every so many years. Unfortunately, I can't give you a good number on that. I don't know whether some of the regional health entities like Cape Cod Commission might have some of that information for you. It might be worth asking them. Because I know some of the regional entities that assist boards of health will tend to be more aware of what's happening within the towns that they serve.
Well, both the county and the Cape Cod Commission do some of that, but I guess the concern that, for asking the question was, we wouldn't want to, say, invent the wheel. If there was some, if there were some people already doing something, we could benefit from the kind of experience that they had had. So there's this woman, Linda Barber, you said, might have some more information on the towns that have, that.
Yeah, so she's the person that receives those records, and it's Linda Barba, it's Barba. And she's with the wastewater program in the Boston office.
Okay, so she would be at least somebody we could start with to find out who else was doing it and what kind of experience they've had. Or would she just know the ones that were doing it?
Yeah, I don't think she's gonna be able to give you the details about how many towns or which towns actually require testing. I think you'd actually have better luck if you reached out to surrounding communities, health departments and boards of health to find out what they're doing. Or if you had someone do essentially an internet search, oftentimes if a town's got local regulations, they're often pretty easy to find online.
Okay, and then, let's see. Is there something that you would call an ideal drinking water standard? In other words, what is the best potable water standard? I know it's not distilled water, because distilled water is hungry water, and it'll eat up everything that you put into it. So,
Yeah, it'll rob your body of nutrients too.
Yeah.
Because without any mineral content, it's going to sap what's in your body of some of those nutrients. So yeah, so perfectly pristine H2O is not particularly healthy for you. So if the question is related to whether the town should adopt stricter standards than the public drinking water standards,
I don't think we're looking for that as much as we're looking for some, I guess it's a theoretical question about if we're looking for an ideal, what would it be?
Well, the ideal would, in my mind, would be something that was, had none, so, obviously we have drinking water standards for different contaminants. Man-made contaminants, it's better to have zero observable concentrations than having something that's up to but not quite over the limit. And then for other minerals such as, things like calcium, iron, manganese, actually it's good to have some of that in your water. Manganese, unfortunately, at higher concentrations actually can be detrimental, especially for the development of children's brains as they are developing. But
It's also a contribution to your bowel movements too.
What's that?
It's also it also affects some of your bowel movements too, if you have an excess of magnesium.
Yeah, but in terms of I think the most serious concerns are for developmental, and actually I have to take that back. I think there may also be, I might have this wrong, there may be some long-term cancer concerns for very high concentrations. I think the ideal water quality is probably something that it not only meets the drinking water standards, and again, ideally for man-made contaminants, just didn't have any detectable concentrations, but also was below the secondary drinking water standards. For something like iron, the secondary standard is 0.05 milligrams per liter. Iron it's good to have it in your water. Above 0.5 milligrams, sorry, 0.3 milligrams per liter, it's not gonna cause health issues, but it's gonna cause problems with the long-term maintenance of your system. It's gonna potentially plug up your fixtures and your plumbing. It's gonna stain potentially clothes in your laundry and your bathroom fixtures and sink fixtures, tub fixtures. But so the secondary standards are meant to basically protect against aesthetic issues. So I would say, if you're below the secondary standards and the public drinking water standards that are health-based standards, that would be the ideal water. And as you mentioned, for a lot of those minerals that have beneficial have benefits to them, you're better to have some than distilled water that has nothing in it.
All right, so, go ahead,
Just
Dustin.
one quick question. That bottled water that you go in the store and buy, how do you keep track of what's in those bottles of water? Because they're bottled in many states. Does it, yeah, you gotta have some way that they report to you and you gotta take their word for it?
So bottled water is regulated by Mass Department of Public Health. They definitely have to provide sample results of some sort to Department of Public Health for the bottled water that is bottled in Massachusetts. I'm a little fuzzy on what their requirements are for water that is sold in Massachusetts but bottled outside of Massachusetts.
Yeah.
I was involved way back when the Mass DEP first developed a public drinking water standard for perchlorate, and at that time, in cooperation with the Department of Public Health, Mass DEP sent out, we sent out, or maybe we helped DPH develop a mailing that went out to bottlers entities that are selling water in Massachusetts, including from outside sources, asking them to essentially voluntarily submit samples for perchlorate, and we provided a website where residents of Massachusetts could obtain that information. I don't know if beyond that particular one was a voluntary effort for a new standard that would not have applied in other states where the water might be getting bottled. I'm not sure about other contaminants that would be regulated under public drinking water systems regardless of what state you're in. So unfortunately, you would have to ask the Department of Public Health about that issue of bottled water products that are bottled outside of state.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're talking now about what kind of academic or experience credentials should the person who's inspecting the wells have? Would it come under the general heading of our health agent, who's inspecting perk tests and things like that, or should it be a specific set of credentials?
Yeah, so part of that would depend on, this is for the purpose of hiring people to do that.
Could be, or it could be, how do we integrate that particular responsibility into an existing, work staff? What do they have to know in order to inspect a private well that would be different than inspecting a public water supply?
Yeah, so certainly anyone that is responsible for collecting samples for public water systems would be well qualified to collect samples from a private well, and we have certified operators for public water systems. In terms of weighing, if it's a question of hiring staff,
It also might be a question of identifying contractors who could do this.
Yeah, weighing credentials against their ability to potentially do it. Certainly, I would say probably any lab technician, anybody working at a Mass DEP certified lab. Certainly, an LSP, licensed site professional, they have to do water sampling all the time for their work. any groundwater consulting firm, you know, whether it's a professional engineer or, you know, a hydrogeologist or anyone else that works on groundwater issues. One thing that occurred to me is you may even consider essentially anyone that has kind of a environmental science or science related some academic training, and maybe even a student that hasn't finished, if you need to beef up the ability to do that in the summer months. And one thing that occurred to me is, so, and this would be people that had no water sampling experience, but you might want to talk to Barnstable County Water Quality Lab and see whether they might be willing to provide training to staff that might not have previously had experience. But you know, in my mind, if somebody's in an environmental science field, they're probably motivated to want to know how to do it, and so you're kind of shrinking the field a little bit to people that are, you know, going to potentially take their job more seriously. But that might be an option to, especially if you're having a hard time attracting individuals to serve that role.
Well, we've done that in the past. The county has done water testing for years, and I'm sure that might be something we should approach them on as far as training. But
They do hire summer staff.
Just one quick one that just occurs to me. You know, a lot of entities are in the business of doing the home appraisals, and you know, those, as far as I know, those entities don't have any Mass DEP certification for how to collect a water sample, but they're in the business. If they're in the business of providing that service, collecting a sample and sending it off to a Mass DEP certified lab, you know, they potentially also would have the required skill set.
are you suggesting that on a property transfer, that water quality of the private well should be part of that transfer, or part of the inspection at that time?
Well, oftentimes it is. Whether the municipality's Board of Health requires it or not on real estate transaction, a lot of lending institutions are requiring some form of water quality testing. It becomes problematic in Massachusetts because the question then becomes, what do they need to test for? And unfortunately, because well, I can't say unfortunately, I'm not supposed to take sides on any political issues, but in Massachusetts, because we don't have statewide regulations, it often becomes a question when someone is wanting to collect the samples for a real estate transaction that's being required by a lender, in terms of, well, what are we supposed to test for? Because the lender will say, test for what is required, and in some
Well, that's part of my conversation today, is, is what we're supposed to require, let's say, to make people safe, or feel, as best as we can, to exercise judgment with regard to safety.
Yeah, and the local boards of health, through certain state statutes, have full authority to make those types of regulatory requirements. And I will tell you, again, I've given a lot of presentations over the past couple of decades to health agent audiences, and that has been a recurring concern that's been raised at those meetings. Is, you have a particular Board of Health that wants to be proactive on some of these issues, and they say it's kind of difficult for us to do so because the immediately abutting municipalities are not taking these steps, and then they end up getting a lot of political backlash for trying to impose sensible private well regulations.
I think we.
Covered about everything.
And do you have any particular takeaway that you want us to have?
Yeah, so but just in terms of the philosophy of whether or not private well testing should be required, I think from my perspective, there's kind of two different aspects to it. And one is certainly the health protection end of it. And when you're talking about things like real estate transactions, in my mind, there's also a consumer protection angle to this. It's similar to, you can't sell a home without having a Title V inspection, and one of the main purposes of that is to not have the buyer get suddenly find out that they've got a failed system that they, hadn't realized they were going to have to pay for, and now they're strapped with their, especially new home buyers, with their large mortgage. Similarly, some of these, as you guys probably are finding out, some of these contaminants, PFAS contamination and others, are fairly expensive, especially if somebody's doing a whole house treatment instead of a point of use treatment. But other than that, there was another question I saw regarding what resources can be provided by the state.
Yeah.
Any issues that either that the board comes up with on its own, or you get inquiries from private well owners that are concerning health risks, I would suggest that the Department of Public Health would probably be the better entity to talk to regarding health concerns. In terms of pretty much all the other stuff, for the past, since 2006 for arsenic and since 2015 for all other private well related issues, I'm probably the in-house expert on private well issues. I was responsible for drafting the current versions of the changes that resulted in the current versions of the private well guidelines and the Model Board of Health regulations. And I've been a resource since 2015 and pretty regularly receive inquiries from local health agents and boards of health when they have a particular issue of concern, want some, my background is hydrogeology, so I can, I'm fairly knowledgeable about issues such as, seasonal changes in contaminant concentrations, how groundwater is flowing, well construction issues, so I'm certainly available to answer those kinds of questions. Other than that, I don't know that there's a depth of knowledge in Mass DEP specifically regarding private well issues, just because we're not statutorily given the jurisdiction to regulate private wells.
Okay, well, with that, I'm going to suggest that you be open to our health agent getting in contact with you, because we're going to charge her with the responsibility of drafting a regulation. So hopefully after she gets that done, that she could run it by you, and you could perhaps give her some direct feedback with regard to, does it make sense from the point of view of your experience? And also, will it indeed do what we're aiming to, which is enhance the safety and the quality of life of the people that, are relying upon a private water supply. Does that make sense, Caitlin?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think the best resource that I can provide is if the town is contemplating, especially if the town's contemplating things that are outside of what's in the model regulations, I can certainly provide both pros and cons of what's being contemplated, and allow you to make a more informed decision as to whether certain variations from the model regulations make sense. I am not allowed by state statute to advocate for or against anything, but I can certainly.
We know all
give you
about that
technical,
part, yeah.
These are the pros and cons, and you guys can decide for yourself what tips the balance in one direction or another for you.
Okay, well, great. So at this point, unless the fellows have,
No, good.
and Barbara, you have any questions?
No, that was really informative, thank you.
Okay, so Caitlin will be in touch with you, and we'll hope to make some more progress on this, because, again, the concern of the Board of Health is supposed to be the health and safety of, our citizens, and this is what we've considered to be important enough to have you come down, and thank you very much. It's been, I would say that it's been very interesting, very informative. Thank you, and we were sort of picking your brain as to what's going on, so, thank you.
Yeah, happy to do so. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, well, all right. We're learning a lot today, huh? Okay, now we have somebody who's been waiting patiently to tell us something from 160 Clark Road. Let's see, Stephen Rye, let's see, I don't know all these letters mean, EIT-SESI of Land Planning Incorporated, on behalf of owners Richard and Camine,
Corinne.
Corinne.
willing,
Corinne. Corinne.
Corinne.
Whittington.
Whittington trustees requesting waiver from Board of Health regulations to be the continued use of existing septic system to accommodate the raise and rebuild of a single-family dwelling unit. Okay, you're on.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Rich Whittington. Very interesting, by the way, before I begin my presentation, I happen to be the founder and president of Whitman Homes. We've done over 1,200 homes over the last 30 years. I did an awful lot of homes in Stoughton on private wells. I will tell you that if you're looking for some feedback, what Stoughton required was, even before a building permit was issued, Board of Health had to sign off on that building permit. We had to show that the well produced enough volume before and then before CO, they had to sign off on the CO. We had to show the water quality test. Independent certified lab would come in, take a sample, determine what needed to be filtered, if anything at all. Filtration system would go in, retest, that had to be provided to Board of Health before a CO would be granted.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, just going on here. And, when we started talking about it, and it's sort of a casual way, that's how,
Yeah, but I do agree, on real estate transfers, just like the fire department requires a certification that you have operating carbon monoxide detectors and smoke detectors. If I was a buyer, I'd want to know that that's good water that I'm buying, so.
yeah, all of that. But enough of this frivolous activity.
Oh, it's not true.
We've held you up long enough. Tell us what you
So,
want.
thank you for hearing us. I'm here for a waiver on one of your regulations. I have with me Stephen Rye here from Land Planning. As you see in my application, my wife and I, who's here, although
Pretty girl.
although my company will be building the home, this is for us personally, so this is kind of special. It's a very unique piece of property, very excited to be involved with this project. After this meeting, we hopefully have one more meeting to go before we can build our forever home there. However, prior to purchasing this property, I did do a little due diligence, went to Board of Health, determined that it had a proper Title V, it did have a 6-bedroom system. However, I was unaware of the regulation relative to the 150-foot setback from wetland resource. So I was surprised when I received Caitlin's memo that it does infringe upon that setback. And I was wondering why the previous owner was not required to get that waiver when that system was initially put in. I understand no member of the board was back here in 2003 when it was put in, but
So we can't answer it.
right, you can't answer.
And so the next thing is, that was then, this is now.
Right. So Mr. Rye will go over our plan, and if the board has any questions, we're here to answer them.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you.
Good evening. Stephen Rye with Land Planning, for the record. The property is approximately a half an acre in size and located on Clark Road, right across from Sagamore Beach. The existing home's got a 6-bedroom home. It's a 6-bedroom home with proximate to the beach is. Well. So the existing home is located roughly 84 feet from the beach. And the existing septic system is located in red here, shown in the back. That was constructed to replace 2 failed cesspools. The former cesspools were located in the back of the property here, which were much closer to the resource areas, which are the coastal bank and the coastal beach. In the proposal now, based on Rich's had inspections by a structural engineer on the property, looking at the existing structure, and does not feel that it's feasible or economical to be able to repair the existing structure. So that what he's come up with is an architect's plan to kind of reproduce the same look to the house, but providing one less bedroom. So it'll be a 5-bedroom unit, and using the existing septic system, which was replaced in 2003, which consisted of a 1,500-gallon tank and concrete structures and a wash stone system. That was located pretty much split by the 150-foot distance from the coastal bank. And as Rich said, he was unaware of that and thought he would be able to just reconnect with that system once he constructed the new dwelling. So we're here for a waiver of that. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
We'll start off with the health agent.
Yeah. So like you said, it's a 2003 system that replaced failed cesspools. They are reducing the bedroom count from 6 to 5. They even did me a favor, and the 6th room that was defined as a bedroom was just an office, but they still opened that up, so 5 bedrooms it is. Their nitrogen loading calculations do reduce nitrogen loading to the system, to the lot, by reducing that bedroom space and also just changing lot coverage a little bit. They are fully outside of the state required 100-foot buffer. They're just slightly inside of our 150-foot buffer. Yeah, that's all I have.
My one question is, the system that is presently there, is that set up for, will that handle a 5-bedroom house?
Yes, it's a 6-bedroom system that is fully functioning as a 6-bedroom system right now.
As of now, the Title V, has that had a
Passed,
Title
yes.
V?
Mhm.
All right, thank you.
Dawn? Bobby? Barbara?
Caitlin, thank you for having them open up that office, because that was the one thing that
Yeah,
I
mhm.
noticed. Like, how wide is the opening to the office?
6 feet.
6 feet, okay,
Yep,
perfect,
mhm.
thank you. That was the only thing I noticed. Thank you.
Any other questions?
No, you want it?
Then I would entertain a motion.
160 Clark Road, Stephen Rye, EIT, SE, SI of Land Planning Incorporated, on behalf of owners Richard Corinne Whittington, trustees, requesting waiver from the Board of Health regulation as the continued use of existing septic system to accommodate the raise and rebuild of a single-family home.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Roll
Aye.
call.
Roll call.
Dusty?
Yes. Yes.
Dawn? Bobby?
Yes.
Barbara?
Yes.
And me, myself, yes.
Thank you very much.
Does this waiver also include the permit to reconnect to the?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're all set.
Yeah, good luck.
And thanks for,
Look forward to seeing the new.
thanks for being part of the group of 4,000 that we're here to hear. the
And it's
presentation.
safe to flush.
Okay, let's see, we have now the, let's see, health agent update.
Yes.
Finally.
So I'll start off with just a little update from meeting that we had for a failed system back in 2022, related to 26 Massasoit Ave. The system was in failure in 2019, and they failed to upgrade within the 2 years, so they were heard before the board. There was a couple back and forth meetings, and then the board finally had asked for them to come back with just a tight tank. They were not happy with what was being proposed at this lot. Groundwater is pretty high in that area, the lots are pretty small, and they're all just the original cottages. Most of them aren't even insulated on Massasoit. So that was what was told. They were gonna come back to the next meeting. Between that time period, the homeowner ended up firing her engineer because of just, it wasn't going very well. And she hired a new engineer eventually. And it looks like in the midst of all that, it got lost translation. She doesn't live here year round. And that engineer submitted a plan for review, was not ready for, not for this meeting date. But it did take a look at it just to give you guys an update on that. And they are proposing a tight tank that looks to be the adequate size. I don't have any concerns with it as of right now. But I was wondering if you guys wanted to have that on a board hearing coming up, or if you felt comfortable with an administrative approval on that tight tank.
Okay. Oh, Barbara?
I guess, well, obviously, Caitlin, we encourage administrative approvals where appropriate. I think with all the back and forth we've had with this applicant, I think they should come back before us. Because it's been years and there's been just like a lot of confusion around it. I guess that would just be my opinion, like have them have a vested interest and come in before us, just to show us what they're really doing.
Anybody else?
No, I agree with Barbara. We had quite the conversation with the engineer who did not want a tight tank. And we even put stipulations, if I remember correctly, on that they were supposed to come back to us once a year and
Yeah,
with a
I think so.
reporting.
We'll have to look. Yeah.
So a tight tank is what we wanted, and now we're getting it. So I agree with it.
Dylan? Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, come back.
Like for them to come back for us.
Okay.
Awesome, yeah.
And what's the other one?
So spring ORV distribution. So just wanted to update you guys
What is
that,
ORV?
oral rabies vaccination.
Ooh, okay.
So Brian Bjorklund of Cape Cod Rabies Program has just updated us that the baiting distribution will start on the 6th of May.
They're still doing it?
Yeah, we do it every year.
God.
Yeah. Mhm.
The year that they stopped it, the public should know.
Yeah.
That it got down to Provincetown within 2 months.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So we'll be doing both, they'll be doing both vehicle and helicopter-based ORV, which should be completed by the 10th. Bourne is in the area that gets done by helicopter, so we won't physically be doing it. By the 10th of May, as long as weather is permitting for aerial.
Any notice to
approaches.
folks about, of course, all people in Bourne are supposed to keep their animals on a leash.
Yes.
Okay, so they're
We
well
usually
warned.
we'll put up like a notice on our website as well.
Right, okay. All right, anything else?
I do not have anything right now, no.
Any questions for the health agent while we're here?
Relating to that?
Yeah.
No.
And any comments from the board with regard to future agenda items? Anything coming up? We do have, we are calling a special meeting, and I hope that, there is a Zoom link, so if you are available,
Yeah,
I'd
executive
like
session.
everybody to try to make it.
Yeah.
Okay, the public has already left, and now we have minutes from, how many minutes do we have?
Just the one from February 14th.
Okay, when I reviewed them, I didn't find anything off. Anybody else? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
Make a motion to approve the minutes from February 14th, 2024.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Barbara?
Yes,
And myself, aye, okay. And, let's see, I think there's another item on the agenda. What the hell is it? I'm trying to think about it.
I'll call you from home and tell you.
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
No, somebody has to
So
make it.
moved, so moved.
Motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? second's supposed to come after,
Second.
not before.
Second.
Enough of that, okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much for your patience. It was a long meeting, but I think we learned a lot.
It was great.
Okay, so it looks like we're all set to go ahead.